This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, difficult art, and our complicated relationships with art and culture. My name's Hugh, I'm the host of the show, and I'd like to take this opportunity to put in a very mild content warning for the show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good, but sometimes there are aspects of the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Check the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. This evening, it gives me very great pleasure to welcome back returning champion Ross Palethorpe. How's it going?
Kia ora. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back and talking about one of, I wouldn't say it's one of my favourite movies, but it's a movie I'm really fond of. So, yeah, a really good way to spend a Monday evening, I think.
Wonderful. Yeah, so the movie we're talking about is Dark Star, which is 1974, I think.
That's correct, yeah.
And my first thought, because I'd never seen it before, I watched it for the first time with my wife so I could talk about it with you, and my first thought was it's almost like reading these guys' notebooks, because it's...
Yes.
I keep getting the two JC filmmakers the wrong way around. It's John Carpenter, not James Cameron.
Yes. Although I could see why you would say James Cameron, actually. Yeah. So it's John Carpenter's student movie and Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, among a whole host of other things. And as you said, it's a real... I think one of the things that really gets me about this movie is, as a big science fiction and nerd, basically, I can't think of another way to put it, to see where a lot of the stylistic shorthand that you now get and have had in science fiction films for such a long time, to see where they've come from. And it's not 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's this little $60,000 student film that came out 6 years later and almost completely undid the sort of cinematic narrative of how space could look in such a short space of time. I find it absolutely fascinating, and revisiting it for this podcast, I mean, this is the first time I'd sat and watched it, and it must have been about 15 years. And you always have that fear of, here's a film that I remember from when I was younger and thought was absolutely phenomenal, and am I going to watch it again and think it sucked, which I call the Crow effect, after trying to show someone the Crow as an adult. I
haven't revisited the Crow. That was like the coolest thing in the world at a particular point in my teenage years, so I dread to think.
Yeah, I was the same. I loved The Crow as a teenager. I was that goth, desperately trying to look like Brandon Lee in that film. And then I remembered showing it to, I think I was trying to show it to a girlfriend of mine as to, this film is really good and you were going to love it. And I cringed. Like, I'm surprised I didn't collapse into myself and form like a tiny black hole. Such was the depths of my embarrassment. But watching Dark Star again, and so I watched it with my son. He's 6. Not intentionally. I was just running out of time before we recorded, and I was like, if I don't watch it now, I'm just not gonna. And it's the only John Carpenter movie I think you can watch with 6-year-olds and not scar them for life. But I loved it. It really held up, and there was some themes in it and things which were weirdly very timely, almost 50 years on.
Yeah, that's the thing that I wanted to touch on, because if you go and read like the Wikipedia article for this movie, it describes it almost like it's going to be kind of like a screwball comedy or something. It's like a satire of these guys who've begun to lose it after being isolated on a spaceship for a long time. And you could imagine something with that description being like, I don't know, like I've forgotten the guy's name, like Blazing Saddles.
Right.
But you could imagine it being that kind of, but it's got much more of, I was getting like Joseph Heller vibes, like the way that it starts with the video announcement from the guy back on Earth saying like, you guys are great, we love you. No, we're not going to give you any more supplies.
Yeah.
and everything, like they're stuck on this shitbox rickety death trap of a spaceship that's already killed one of the crew, and it's not going to get fixed because they can't be bothered, and also they don't have any spare parts and no one's going to send them any.
Yeah.
Like it's this real kind of grim, like space is a shitty blue collar job thing.
Right. And I think that was so interesting to me. You have the film opens with this communication from Earth and this extremely professional looking guy talking to the crew of the Dark Star. And it was proper clap for our NHS, wasn't it? It was real.
Yeah.
Thoughts and prayers to our brave workers on the front line. We're not going to do anything to keep you safe. We're not going to do anything to address your real sort of health and safety concerns, or do anything about the fact that a key member of the crew has already died. We're not going to put in any radiation shielding. We hear your concerns, but government cutbacks, guys. And I was sitting there thinking that I know that science fiction tells us as much about the present as it does about the time that people are predicting, but it was a real, I'm watching this in 2023. The film is nearly 50 years old at this point, and really touching on some nerves there. And the contrast between this, the person in this video message, which is very... That's the satire of 2001, isn't it? Like, he's got the hair, he's got the diction, and then it cuts.
And he's wearing... Is he military or just in a very sharp suit? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's a real sort of... it's a real throwback to... I mean, they had just finished sending people to the moon at this point. This was a real callback to sort of the late 60s... space program stuff. So if you had no idea what the film's about, you would think that was setting up the tone, and then it cuts to these space hippies bickering in a tin can, and it's such a jarring. I mean, we're used to it now. I think this idea of space travel, as you said, of being like you watch The Expanse, or if you were growing up, you watched Red Dwarf, or all these other things. This idea of space as being this scuzzy, shitty, unpleasant place to live in, but this was the first time we'd ever seen anything like that, and it's still quite surprising.
Yeah, I said to my wife, like, number one science fiction locations you can immediately smell just by looking at. Because if people haven't seen this movie, where a lot of the action takes place is in the kind of central control room. Their job is to launch these bombs and blow up planets that are going to be in the way of some... It's like the idea is that humans will eventually colonize bits of space, and we need to get these dangerous, rogue planets out the way. But I feel like it's implied that that's probably not happening, and these guys are just too much trouble to bring back. But they sit in this control room where two of them face one way and the guy in the middle faces the opposite way. And there's this triangle roof with dials and buttons, right over their heads. It's this tiny little triangular tin can, and they're all, unkempt, and they smoke in the spaceship. And it's just, you can immediately just smell the stench of, unwashed dude and, decades of cigarettes.
Right, it's and I find that such a fascinating visual choice anyway. Again, the obvious comparison here. So it was 6 years after 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's a couple of years after Silent Running came out as well. So this is right at the start of this. What is space travel going to look like? And the command center of this is almost an identical, maybe not identical, but stylistically it's very similar to what the Apollo command module looked like. Everyone's really cramped. Everyone's in these ugly flight suits. It as you said, you can almost smell it. And I think in those respects, it's probably a closer idea of what early space travel and going to the moon and things actually resembled than anything that we had seen from Clarke or Asimov. And I love it for that. These people are there's no real sympathetic characters in here. They're just, what if space travel was just a bunch of guys? They bicker, they have these, you can tell that they've been in each other's company for far too long. Like, they've got nothing left to say to each other. They're bored out of their minds. I think, as you said, like, it's too much trouble to bring them back. They're at the whims of a government that has kind of forgotten about them. There's a class issue in here as well, if you really wanted to explore it.
Absolutely. And one of them is, this is what the other thing that gave me Joseph Heller vibes. One of them is strongly implied to be the wrong guy. Like, he was a fuel technician who got mistaken for an astronaut, and now he just can't get off the ship because he's been there for... They keep making light speed jumps, which means that their subjective time is different from real time. So in real time, they've been out there for like 20 years, despite the fact they've been out there for like 4 subjective time or something like that. Yeah.
There's this real... So Pinback, who's actually played by Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, who's... And we'll get to the Alien in a minute.
Oh, yeah.
But, like, he is... he does this video diary, which is also very prescient, very funny. And he sort of makes this confession about how, I'm not really Sergeant Pinback, and my name's Bill Frug, and I was a technician, and the actual Pinback, I watched him commit suicide and stole his uniform and came on board, and I have regretted it ever since. And I thought, but there's so much, it's such so densely packed with ideas. Like, the film is an hour and 20 minutes long. Like, there, as I said, there's class. There's this idea of like futurism and like industrial decay, and it's got some really deep philosophical themes in it, and it just picks up these ideas and plays with them a little bit and puts it down. And from this cheap ass movie, there's... like, it really set the tone. And like, the number of notes that I took, where I'm like, this, you get this scene in Aliens. This bit's like straight from whatever. And it's, and I think it because this is real sort of gold, like the new wave of Hollywood. Like, this is coming out the same year as The Godfather, I think. And obviously it's not The Godfather, but that you really get that sense of, here are a bunch of people who are being given an opportunity, like, a very homogenous bunch, let's be honest, but here's a bunch of people who have the opportunity to create things that have not been created before, and what ideas can we throw out there? And it's exciting to watch in that respect. You really get the sense of people thinking, what can we do here? And I think a really big example of that is, I did a bit of research on this, that the early scenes with the hyperdrive, that was the first time it had ever been depicted in cinema, and we still use that template today. The spaceship stays still, and all of the stars suddenly become like lines instead of points of light. This is where you see it first.
That was the thing I really wanted to mention. That's kind of what I meant about seeing these guys' notes, because Dan O'Bannon, as well as writing Alien, went on to do a bunch of special effects work for Star Wars, and he brought the camera trick that they used to do the hyperspace effect with them, and that's how Star Wars ends up with that. Like, it's such an iconic bit of Star Wars-ness that if you do it, people think you're ripping off Star Wars, or referencing Star Wars at least. But this is where it comes from. Yeah,
and it's we've already mentioned, like, Star Wars we've mentioned before, the Alien trilogy we've mentioned before. The idea, even Interstellar, which came out not that long ago, this idea of the people in the spaceship not aging particularly much, but everybody back home aging significantly. I mean, it's so many ideas. You can see these guys, these students, just literally like exploding off the screen of what can we create here. I mean, it was originally the original student short film cost $5,000 at the time, which is absolute buttons. And the quality of the special effects in this movie, they really hold up, like, they really were super inventive with trying to create something that was really complicated.
Yeah, like the strongest criticism you could come up from them is that the model work in space looks a little bit kind of not quite, because they're still figuring out how to do it. But again, It's kind of like watching them come up with the notes for how to do the Star Destroyer scene in the first Star Wars. Like, this is like the first draft of that thing.
Yeah. The shape of the Dark Star is very similar to a Star Destroyer. Like the idea of the bomb, so the bombs that they use to blow up these planets all have an artificial intelligence to them, and the ship has an artificial intelligence which was then used. It was the template for Mother in the original Alien movie, and I was like, one of the things that really caught me watching this now, which I certainly wouldn't have picked up the first time I saw it, is this idea of the Internet of Things. Like the fact that the bombs are intelligent and have sort of like an AI is like, why would they need that? But also, why does your fridge need Wi-Fi? You know, like this idea of we're going to make it like automated and semi-intelligent for no reason whatsoever, and how that comes ultimately destroy the ship. Spoiler, sorry if I'm spoiling like a 49-year-old movie
exactly.
for you.
Yeah, no, I did want to talk about the bombs as well, because that is the whole process of blowing up the planets involves having a conversation with the artificial intelligence in the bomb, who's knows that its job is to go and blow up, and that's its goal in life. And it's a very kind of, it's funny, but it's quite uncanny as well. It's like the spookier bits of Douglas Adams somewhat. Like you're talking to this really chipper little computer who's super happy to go and blow itself up.
Yeah. This like they all have this very chipper, real sort of again, going back to that atomic age, 1950s, 1960s radio announcer, like it's a very specific time and place of an accent, and they are a thermostellar device, which is a phenomenal name to give something. And, you witness this first explosion and the hyper jump that they take to get away from it. And they explode, like I say, it looks really impressive for the time. And I think there's always something really quite engaging about those kinds of practical special effects. Like I'd far rather watch that than whatever Marvel of 2023 would come up with to show that, because it feels like it's got a bit of weight to it. And so the second bomb, through a series of misadventures caused by cutbacks, refuses, like it gets a bit confused, and it decides it's going to explode. And the way that that's dealt with is very clever and very pea-brained all at once, and very, very 70s.
Which, I mean, it also touches on a bit of kind of like existential horror that's kind of floating around the edge of the movie as well. So what happens is that they end up with a bomb that's armed itself and is refusing to leave the bomb bay doors because of, essentially the ship's falling to bits and the system that's supposed to disconnect it doesn't work. And the computer has a long argument with the bomb and fails to convince it that it shouldn't blow up. So they're forced to resort to opening up the cold storage of the captain, who's been dead since before the start of the movie, and talking to him on this weird little microphone device. And it turns out that like a secret bit of the universe of the movie is that you can just talk to dead people. You can wake their consciousnesses up in cryo storage and talk to them. But they're like, I don't know, it's like they've had some sort of like degenerative dementia or something. Like they're like fraying away to nothing.
Genuinely creepy scene.
Yeah.
And another show of the kind of special effects that you can create on the smell of an oily rag. So, they've talked about the Commander Powell and this idea that he was the one that really kept everything together, and he dies in like his chair blows up or something. And this create like, there's a real sense of like, discomfort around the fact that, like bits of the ship can explode and kill you, which would, I think, upset all of us. And so Doolittle, who sort of assumed command, who throughout has been, he's a man who is just taken on this. All I am here to do is to blow up planets. I don't give a shit about anything else. He comes across as very surly. There's one scene with another crew member who has lost his mind in a different way and now just spends his entire time looking at the stars. He has this little conversation with him about how he misses surfing and he wished he brought his board with him just so he could wax it every once in a while, which was really, for a character that has been very withdrawn and very grumpy, to suddenly just share this little piece of himself. Again, it's another idea. It gets picked up, and then they move on. But he takes it upon himself. He's like, "We're going to go down and talk to the captain." And the captain is genuinely chilling. Like, and I don't mean that just in his cryogenically frozen. Like, eyes rolled back and it looks like a corpse. And the way that it talks, and a thing that struck me about that was, how do we know that's genuinely him and it's not just another AI? Like, there's this real bleed through of what is consciousness and what is a human and what is not. That, again, for a film that's like, what if stoners in space, is really quite deep.
Yeah, it is. And I guess, I mean, this is a thing that's on my mind for reasons that we won't go into because it's outside the scope of the conversation. But like, it does really give me that we don't know that it's necessarily him. It might be something that thinks it's him, but also he keeps talking about how much he's forgotten and how hard it is to keep track of things and why don't people come and talk to him more often. And that bit's almost like a little bit petulant, and it gives me very dementia-y vibes in a way that's quite discomforting, as well as him being like a frozen corpse.
Yeah. There's you can really see the through line, I think, of, say, Dan O'Bannon's later work in horror, John Carpenter's, like, if you haven't heard of John Carpenter, why are you listening to this podcast? But that real, like, again, these ideas, some really chilling parts in that. And yeah, I really hear you on that, like, depiction of dementia. Yeah, that petulance, that forgetting where they are and having the conversation over again. And it's dealt with, it's not dug into too far. Like, they're on a time limit. It's the classic race against time, like you would get in Aliens, for example. That real sense of trying to get the answer out of someone who is not really capable of giving it, and how successful is that answer going to be anyway? So it's a real sense of they are completely out of options. But yeah, there's so many little horrifying aspects to it, which, taken as a whole, I think really get across how appalling and how dark their situation really is, in a way that I can't really imagine. And I don't want to be like, oh, it's a golden age of cinema and blah, blah, blah. But I would struggle to think of another film that has this much impact that would have such a light touch with some of these things.
Well, I mean, I guess if I was going to have a reserved recommendation about this movie, one of the things that struck me is that, and I think this is an artifact of its construction. Like, it started as a $5,000 student film, and then they got the chance to make it into a $60,000 feature film. And the way they did that was by adding a whole bunch of stuff to what was already there. Some of which is only kind of tangentially related to the rest of the movie. And it means that it does have all of these ideas, but like you say, it often just raises them and immediately discards them. And so it sometimes can't, like, quite make up its mind what sort of movie it is. Like, is it Stoners in Space, or is it the one where you have to talk to the creepy dementia corpse in the fridge on a 5-second timer before everyone's blown up?
Yeah.
Turns out it's actually both of those, and they're not always compatible.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it's not, like I say, it's not my favorite movie, but it is one that I'm very, very fond of, and it's very much as with all these things, when you find the notebook rather than the final draft, like, you get this great sense of experimentation and exploration, and what can we achieve with this. And I would love to see the original short film. Like, I'd be fascinated by that. One of the scenes that they added was the scene with the alien, which, is very, very funny. and really quite clever and creepy all at once, and has a genuine sense of like high stakes around it, which is is quite an impressive thing for a bolt-on. But lots of it doesn't work as well as you would want it to, and there is that real sense of, I don't want to say missed opportunity, but potential. Like bits of it really drag. The sound quality in places is absolute garbage. There's some real, like, if you're a stickler for continuity, I have really bad news for you. You're not going to get it here.
And I mean, a lot of those things were, again, kind of artifacts of the process. I was reading that one of the characters, I think it's the one who's lost his mind and just spends all of his time in the bubble staring at the stars, had an incredibly strong accent, so they couldn't understand what he was saying. So everything that he says is dubbed, despite the fact that everybody else is recorded on set. So whenever he talks, there's like a noticeable difference in sound quality.
Yeah, which they almost get away with on grounds that he spends his entire time in a hermetically sealed bubble. So again, it's things that don't work but kind of do, and it's it's a mess, but it's a lovable mess. And I was going to say sense of opportunities missed, but it's not, because so many of those opportunities are picked up in other films which are less rough, and you can almost see who has watched this film and the bits that they took from it. And I think that in that instance, it's such a unique sort of cultural artifact. Every time I watch it, I pick up something, something different. There's always something you go, I've seen that in this film, or, oh, wow, yeah, that's where they got the idea for X. And it's almost like that line about the Velvet Underground, that not many people went to see them live, but everyone who did went and formed a band. It's like, not everyone has seen Dark Star, but the vast majority of people who saw it when it came out went on to make better movies.
I think that's an excellent point to continue. We're around about at the halfway mark, though, so we're going to take a brief break, and we'll be back right after this.
Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
And we're back. You're listening to Reserved Recommendations. This is a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. We talk about great trash and problematic faves, and some of the greatest trash I have watched in some time. I'm talking to Ross Palethorpe about Dark Star, which is James Cameron and... No! It's not James Cameron. See, I did it again. I said at the start I was going to do it. John Carpenter.
We can talk about why that's a really sensible miss, actually. I think coming in so it's John Carpenter's first movie, and I'm not a massive John Carpenter fan. Off the bat, I'm not if someone puts one of his films on, I will sit and watch it, and I'll probably enjoy it. But we need to talk about the Alien and Aliens, absolutely. And therefore James Cameron.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess as a starting off point, one of the things that I saw, because I did some reading around as well, was that the part of the concept of Alien, like the movie Alien, came from that Dan O'Bannon, who did the design and most of the conceit for the sequence in this movie with the alien, which, for reference, looks like a beach ball with duck feet. He had aimed for that to be purely comedic, he thought, but instead people seemed creeped out by quite a lot of it. And so he kind of went, all right, well, maybe I can't play this for laughs, but what if I lean into the bits of it that are quite threatening? Yeah.
So right at the start, there's this discussion around, are they going to find intelligent life? And the Pinback, seems quite keen on this. And the other two members of the crew, Doolittle, who is this really quite nihilistic second in command, who, looking at this from a trauma-informed perspective, has not really recovered from the death of the commander. And Boiler, who honestly is just every 1950s, 1960s film bully. He's got that real... looks like he's going to smash your head against a locker.
Yeah, he's got
thing. Real meathead.
He's got does he have a mullet or just long hair? He's got the Fu Manchu moustache, like just the moustache, but no beard, but it comes down past his chin. He spends his whole time like playing with knives and smoking, and that's about it.
Yeah, he looks like a roadie for the Grateful Dead or something.
Or less like charming than the Grateful Dead. Like
he's a real sort of. He's the closest I think they get to an antagonist, and that he's just like he just is a bit of a shit. Like he's only got like 2 lines of dialogue, I think, and both of those are fighting with Pinback, who's played by Dan O'Bannon actually. So, but they have found an alien or possibly aliens, but the one central one, which is this mascot, which is the most ridiculous looking thing, and it really passed the 6-year-old test. Like my son thought that was absolutely hilarious. He just for what is a large beach ball with duck feet, it has personality. Like it's got quite a malevolent, cheeky streak, and it plays out as this two-hander between the beach ball and Pinback as it attacks him and then escapes around the ship. And it's like, again, it's really fascinating seeing. You can see that what they were trying to go for in terms of this sort of slapstick Three Stooges style, like it takes his stepladder away from him and it tickles him to try and make him fall off something. But it's also an alien creature that seems quite malevolent. And it's, again, everything that's funny in this film also has this slight edge of like quite creeping dread to it. And you can see it. It's not a huge leap from Beach Ball with duck feet to H.R. Geiger phallic nightmare.
It's just, what if we paid like a scary sex creep to design this monster for us? But then we did it again. But I mean, you made the point that it's quite because it's not. I guess what we've established about the world of the movie is that it's these people are stuck on a spaceship which is falling to bits. The captain was killed because his seat back blew up because the force field that protects them when they set the bombs off failed somehow. So we know that like sudden death is quite a possibility. Everything is falling to bits. And what the beach ball is doing is like it's trying to throw Pinback down a literal elevator shaft, and he spends like a bunch of time hanging by one hand while a lift comes down to crush him. Like it's, if you'd set up that the world was like Buster Keaton world to start with, then you could play it for laughs a bit more easily. But because we've already established that things are quite lethal, it's actually kind of hair raising.
Yeah, right. And it's this. The film has a real edge to it, and it's it was again. I didn't intend to watch it with a 6-year-old, but I did, and he thought the alien was very fun. He thought it was like a Mr. Bean-esque type thing, but then he's not seeing this idea of like this aura of malevolence, and it was really quite interesting. Bits where I thought, even still, like at my, as a proper grown up, I still got that sense of like, this is quite unsettling. Is he going to have nightmares at this at night? And he really didn't. But then the alien is killed in a very, very funny way, which is, Pinback ends up like getting a tranquilizer. Why they have a tranquilizer gun on the Dark Star, no idea. And there's this sort of martial music and the point of view shot as he goes and gets this very serious looking tranquilizer gun and fires it at the alien, who of course promptly explodes around the hull of this ship like a balloon that's had the end let off, with accompanying soundtrack, which is pure, like, it's just very, very silly. And, it's just such an interest, like the tonal the tone throughout this movie is so interesting, but a genuinely funny moment. And it sort of brings the film, but I think that's one of the closest bits where the film gets to that sort of stoners in space bit, is that, what we were saying about it, like being Blazing Saddles in space almost. Like it's funny, it's slapstick, and the rest of the film is really quite dark in places.
Yeah, and dark in that here's a bunch of guys who've like looked into the abyss and are trying to work out what to do about it. Because one of the other things that you get of Doolittle, the guy who's been forced to become first in command, is the other sequence you get aside from him lamenting his inability to surf is he builds like an organ out of water bottles, and you get a sequence of him just playing music to nobody with this thing that he's meticulously constructed. And it's kind of poignant, you know, like he's this guy who's all of his interactions with everybody else are quite brusque, and he doesn't have time for trying to explore the universe or any kind of enlightenment. He just wants to find the next thing to blow up. But when he's by himself, he's, you know, sad about not surfing and playing music to no one. And
yeah, like he's probably, you know, Pinback is the played, like the closest you get to a played for last character. Even then, he's a case of mistaken identity who's basically serving life on a ship, like having and doesn't need to be there and shouldn't be there. Doolittle is, as I said, he's quite a deep character. We get very little of him, but what we get hints at something more, like these two scenes. This really poignant scene with this, and it's a piece of crap. You know, there's so many other films you could imagine where this little water bottle organ would look very impressive and would sound wonderful, and there would be this, he's a musician, and he's not. He plays it like a child. It looks like, you know, it looks like it would fall apart at any moment, but you can see how much it means to him to have this creative outlet. And it's quite thoughtful on a number of levels. And I think we really see that that sort of hidden depth thing sort of really pulls together at the end, where the captain in his ramblings suggests that they have to teach the bomb the philosophical concept of phenomenology in order to prevent it from going off. And I can imagine 101 other movies where it would be phenomenology, what's that? And there would be an explainer. And instead, say this character Doolittle knows what that is and goes out and debates like Cartesian understanding of self with an AI with minutes to spare on the clock. And it's, you know, this real show don't tell aspect of a film that didn't have a lot of money to show a lot of stuff with.
Yeah, and I mean, just thinking about the not having a lot of money to show stuff, I was struck by the way in which a lot of the interface design of the things that they're working with constantly, all of that stuff was made out of like ice cube trays and yogurt bottles and stuff with just like bits of plastic with lights underneath. But it really defines that like 70s sci-fi control panel thing where you have like a bank of lit buttons, and you're supposed to understand that the character knows what they do, even though they're like indistinguishable. They just push them in a sequence, and it's very impressive. Right. But that, you know, that continues on to Star Wars. Like that's what the controls of spaceships in Star Wars look like. That's what the controls of spaceships in Alien look like. They're like big square lit up buttons.
And it's not 100 kilometers away from what the control panels in a Saturn V command module looked like. You know, these were, and I think that's it. Like these guys are not incompetent. Like there's not a sense of like bumbling idiots. You see them in that initial sequence. They are dropping a thermostellar device into a planet, and everything goes smoothly, or as well as could be expected. You know, these are, for all of their foibles and all the fact that there's these interpersonal dramas and sort of deep psychological issues, they're getting the job done. And it's, you know, in a way, if you really wanted to probably dig far deeper into it than John Carpenter ever intended, you know, you could talk about it as a bit of a love story to sort of blue collar workers who just go and get shit done at great personal sacrifice, and with increasing budget cuts and an uncaring government.
I mean, you say taking it further than John Carpenter intended. I don't know about that actually, because it feels so on the nose with those aspects that it has. Like the fact that they choose to frame it at the start with the guy saying, "We hear your concerns. You guys are doing great work. We're not going to help you in any way." Like that seems so on the nose that I can't imagine it as anything other than deliberate, that they've taken that tone. And you're right. Like these guys bicker or space out, except when they're in the control panel where they're absolutely professional until stuff goes completely haywire at the end of the movie. But like they go exactly through the sequence. They know exactly what they're doing. Even the bit where they're like bickering over the next place to go and blow something up, it's done with like, "Oh, I found you this. No, that's no good. I want to blow something up." You know, like it's...
Yeah, even Talby, who the character of Talby, who sits in this bubble the whole time and is staring off into space and is looking for phenomena. He gets the signal that something has gone badly wrong with this, with the system that will drop the bomb, and takes action and takes quite like concrete. He knows what he's going to do. He reads this and leaps into action. So it did have this coming at the height of the 70s, and it gained real cult following. And it was this idea of it was hippies in space. And I think the tagline for it was, expect to take like a trip or whatever, kind of really like leveraging off that 2001 aspect. But even so, it's not. They are all doing their job. They all have that sense of self-preservation. They all clearly feel quite deeply about each other. So yeah, I think you're right. Like Carpenter's making a good point here about class, but I think there's also a point you could argue here around masculinity. Like these guys do care about each other, even on some level, even though they find being in each other's presence almost intolerable as a result of being together for so long. Like they're all reading like what looks like the same 5 magazines, and like really run. Like what else would you what would you talk to the same 4 people about after 20 years? What would you say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they've got the same 5 magazines. The computer does like a little for your listening pleasure, and then they play some music. But you've got to imagine that the computer's got like a bank of 20 songs maybe, because it's 1974. They're all individual 45s that are stacked on a spindle somewhere or something like that.
Yeah. And there's no... And there's no option either. There's no, would you like to listen to this? It's for your listening pleasure. We're going to put this on. And it, like, honestly, like, yeah, the music selection is not great. There's a very funny scene where for absolutely no apparent reason, the computer starts playing The Barber of Seville, which is very, very funny. But I think, like, there's a bit there where, speaking of Talby, they're like, someone says, "Oh, what is Talby's first name?" And Doolittle just sort of looks and has that moment of, what's my first name? And it's quite again, that poignancy of that loss of self to this mission that nobody seems to care about anyway. Yeah, there's some real moments in there, which, I mean, none of the actors involved, like there's a lot of, if you look at the Wikipedia page again, like not many of the people involved in it beyond like O'Bannon and Carpenter and a couple of others, but like a lot of the actors in it do not have their own page, did not really appear in anything else, but they put in a really good performance given, the constraints of what they were working with.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about the computer for a second as well, because I think a thing that I found very interesting about the way that they conceive of the computer system is, and it's after 2001, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost like a reply to HAL, that they have this computer the computer can talk to the bombs, it can talk to the crew, and it's aware of what's going on in the ship, but it can't do anything about it. So what you have is this other, it's almost like another entity that's trapped in the same situation of like, this laser has failed, it's going to cause this problem, someone needs to go and fix it, but it can't take any action. All it can do is just talk to these guys who are all to one degree or another, either too busy or incapacitated, and try and get them to do something about the fact that it's falling to bits.
Which is a fascinating, like, larger theme of this film. So I think we're far enough in that we can start talking about the philosophy at the end. So that I said, the captain says, you've got to go out and teach the bomb phenomenology. You've got to go and talk to the bomb about what is its concept of reality. How does it know that the instructions that it has received are real? And you've got 4 minutes to do it. And so off he goes, like off Doolittle goes, and he has this incredible conversation with this bomb about how do you know that you exist? Big question. How do you know, and are you sure that this is real? Are you sure this is just electrical signals that you were receiving? How do you know that those are real? And when you think of, as you said, like the computer is this AI, this organism that has awareness but has no agency. It can tell you what's wrong. It can't do anything about it. It can play you the Barber of Seville, but it can't help you if you are stuck in a lift. And it's such a, these guys know that things are wrong, can't do anything about it. They know that they need radiation shielding, but no one's help isn't coming. And, like such a strong sense of, again, this phenomenon, what's real, what's not, how do we, like, how much agency do we really have? And I think the really, just such a climax where the bomb starts to talk, it's given more instructions, it's gone back into the bomb bay to think about what it wants to do, and at this point only Boiler and Pinback are left on the ship. Due to an accident, Talby and Doolittle are flying off into space, again, very 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the bomb starts to quote Genesis, and it goes from this really clipped sort of, well, now they're coming into the races, and it's number 5, and suddenly like takes on this intonation, and that again is a callback to Apollo 8, where they were circling the moon at Christmas time, and I cannot remember which astronaut it was, starts to read to the people of America and the wider world from the Book of Genesis, and that's quite a profound. And then says, "Let there be light," and you've got these two bickering guys on this who suddenly have this realization as they start to hear this line from Genesis that they are dead, that the bomb has made its decision, and that's quite because that right up until that point you're not sure what's going to happen to these guys. We're brought up on this Hollywood idea that everyone's going to make it home or something's going to happen, and the bomb goes off and the Dark Star explodes.
Yeah, the closest you get to closure is that Talby floats off to join possibly sentient stars. And,
possibly the asteroids.
And Doolittle finally gets a bit of debris that looks enough like a surfboard that he can surf his way into dying and re-entry instead of just falling.
Yeah, which is, again, a real... when you think about the number of ideas that are picked up and put down in this film, to have, the closest thing you have to a protagonist, choose to burn up on re-entry in a way that reminds him of home is, I'm thinking about the film Gravity all of a sudden and what it has to say about death in space. Like so many films that have dying in space as being this absolute, like, nightmarish horror, which it is, all the way to die in space, not one of them. But yeah, again, it would be a couple of sort of note changes, maybe a different soundtrack on that, and that would be extreme, like very sad, very upsetting, very distressing. And instead, it's played to this really quite jaunty country and western number, which again written by Carpenter and just sung by a friend of his from university, which. If you watch this film, will be an earworm for the next 20 years. I'm really sorry about it.
Yeah, no, it'll just eat its way into your brain. You made a good point that this movie's kind of like the Velvet Underground. Like it has this enduring influence, and it reminded me specifically of a couple of fairly recent movies. I mean, recent compared to the 70s at least. Have you seen Duncan Jones's Moon?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I have.
It reminded me quite a lot of that, of the, the kind of blue collar guy stuck on a space station by himself. And also there was, I'm not sure if it was like a Netflix original movie or not, but there was this movie called, a very low budget movie called Prospect about...
No, I haven't seen that one.
Well, it might still be on Netflix, or it might have gone somewhere like Canopy. It's about this guy and his daughter, and they do the spectacularly clever idea of... they're on a verdant forest world where they've landed to harvest this gum stuff, and the air is incredibly poisonous. So basically, in post, they put a whole bunch of pollen into the air to explain why it's poisonous. But the rest of the time, they can be incredibly cheap because they're wandering around just a forest in breath, like just plastic masks.
Yeah.
So they don't have to mess around with, but they are stuck on this world in the middle of nowhere doing this incredibly dangerous contract work about like extracting resin out of the native trees. And if you do it wrong, it'll like burn away in the atmosphere and become valueless. And it does the same trick of giving you these very competent characters who are stuck in this awful, impossible situation because in this case, it's just nakedly capitalism, like they're, I think, indentured workers on this planet. But it gave me very similar vibes. It's like Casablanca. You watch Casablanca and you think this is very derivative because you realize that you've been watching all these other things that were derivative of Casablanca. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think I first watched this. My dad got it for me on VHS when I was a teenager. I'd never heard of John Carpenter, no idea. And he went, I would like to sit and watch this film with you because this is something that I saw when it, close to when it came out. And so there's a real strong bond there with this film, that real sort of core memory, watching this with my dad and him. We did not have a conversation about phenomenology or anything else, but I remember him hooting with laughter at the alien. And, it was the film that created the TV series Red Dwarf, which is also a very enduring sort of cultural artifact of the 80s and 90s, and was certainly a key part of my growing up. You can see why I'm such a nerd now. But this idea, again, this like blue collar space, that people ultimately all of our big dreams of the 50s and 60s of the nuclear and the space age just will come down to being a bunch of guys who are not getting paid enough, working in shitty conditions with no union. And it's that puncturing of this dream that we had. And now, 2023, we're talking about going back into space. We've got Elon Musk talking about SpaceX and we're all going to go into space. And I think part of the reason why we have such a jaundiced eye on this now and we're so cynical is because we know it's going to be, it's going to be union busting on the moon.
Yeah, and I mean, in parallel, when does the original series of Star Trek start? Because that's what, late 70s?
Oh, the original Star Trek. I don't know. That's 60s, I think.
Yeah. So actually, that would be contemporaneous, but it carried the rainbow coalition of glorious space liberalism vision kind of on as long as it possibly could.
Yeah. So that was, I've just checked, 1966. So you've got Star Trek. You've got 2001: A Space Odyssey. You have this, luxury space communism, basically, which is quite a, that's a challenging idea for the 60s. You got McCarthy and HUAC and everything else going on there, and the biggest series is all around, hey, what about if we did away with money and everyone,
and
we
you
live in a
could
post-scarcity
kiss a
society.
black lady if you wanted to.
If you really wanted to, or an alien. Why not both? One of them breaks no laws in certain states and one of them does. And then, counter to that, you have Dark Star, you've got Silent Running, you've got Star Wars comes out, and then that just completely clears the table for space as being this really dirty, grimy thing. And it's rare now that you see science fiction, which is the shiny plastic, that weightless, and I use that phrase like advisedly, concept of space. I think as a culture, we've become quite cynical about it. Doesn't matter if the view outside your window is of an industrial estate or the rings of Saturn. You're going to be underpaid. You're going to hate your boss, and you're going to dislike your coworkers.
Yep, and it transcends cultures. If you think about the most influential anime for people who don't watch anime about flying around in spaceships, it's Cowboy Bebop, which iconically starts every single episode with the space bounty hunters starving because they don't have enough money to buy food, and then the standard arc is they go and try to do a job, it goes badly, they end the episode starving because they don't have any money to buy food.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could spend a whole extra hour talking about all of the different influences, just thinking about it. Like you could say that Blade Runner has this idea of like real capitalism come down really hard, and a real sort of like concept of a class system and AI and everything else. Firefly is another one, Confederates in space. There's real like that. Just again, we've become very cynical to the concept of what space can offer, and rightly so.
Yeah. And
rightly so.
Why would you expect the boss to be different from the boss because the boss is in space?
Yeah. Here comes the space boss, just like the old boss. But yeah, so let's say I'm very, very fond of it. And there was a moment sitting watching this film and my kid going, what are we watching? And I said, this was a film that I watched with my dad. And his excitement about, and now you're watching it with me. And that's the first time that he has really understood this concept of like the intergenerational culture thing. Like his eyes got kind of big when he was like, you watched this when you were young. It's like, not quite 6, buddy, but like there's something quite nice about the first time that he has that awareness of something I think is important enough from my childhood to show him. And it's this grimy, cheap student movie by the guy that did The Thing. I will not be showing him The Thing for quite some time.
No, I would give that a minimum of 10 years, probably.
Yeah, I'll let him find that one out on his own. But this was... It's now available on YouTube, which was great because we had this discussion about doing this show, and I thought, like, I had this on VHS 25 years ago. I have no idea if it's in print now or whatever. And then, it's on YouTube with some slight edits, and it sort of gained a bit of a boost because apparently Quentin Tarantino, like a year or so ago, went on a podcast and said this was an absolute masterpiece.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, Quentin's useful for the odd thing. That's pretty cool. Well, look, thank you for coming on.
Moments.
Thank you for coming on and talking about this movie. I probably wouldn't have watched it if you hadn't said it was a thing. And I'm very glad I did because, as we said, it is like getting to see the first draft of all of these other things that are just so iconic if you like science fiction at all. That was amazingly cool. So I like to do two things by way of finishing off. The first is, do you have any other recommendations for things that people could watch? I guess. I mean, I already mentioned Moon and Prospect, which I would thoroughly recommend both of them if you like the idea of like capitalism is a bad time in space. And also a little bit of like extra sci-fi jiggery pokery. Moon has a very good like awful twist, and Prospect does. Prospect I would recommend as like an excellent example of doing spectacular world building with very little. Like every new element that comes into that movie kind of tells you something about the wider world that makes you want to like go and read a book about it and find out what's going on.
Yeah, I think in terms of movies, certainly, I think it's weird because if you have liked the other films that we have talked about, which are a far more important part of the cultural canon, you will get something from Dark Star. Like there's some, as you said, there's something quite thrilling seeing where this stuff originated from. I think in terms of some of the deeper themes around class and around industrialization and rampant capitalism. The Starfish trilogy by Peter Watts, and also his seminal novel Blind Sight. Highly recommend Blind Sight as a science fiction standalone novel. Like, the guy's ability to put these really deep, challenging, quite upsetting themes in ripping like science fiction yarns is unparalleled. He's very, very good. Blind Sight, certainly, for what it says about concepts of like consciousness, searching for aliens, the realities of even being on like the most advanced starships imaginable is superb. Got me thinking about things that I had not previously considered. And the Starfish and the other two books in that series, proper capitalist hellscape, massive content advisories throughout, but if you've got a stomach for it, very, very good.
On that topic, also, I would recommend the book Walkaway by Cory Doctorow, which is a post-climate change but also post-scarcity disaster novel. Basically, climate change has ravaged the earth. The gap between rich and poor has become unsurmountable, but also there are nanomachines. And so what happens is that people will just wander off into the blasted waste and create experimental societies to see if there's an alternative way of living. And because that's very threatening to the society that the unfathomably wealthy want to keep maintaining, they will send the cops after you to murder you if you do this. And it's
very Cory Doctorow.
It is very Cory Doctorow, but similarly, like capitalist hellscape, very fascinating meditations on AI. There's a whole bit about using AI to mimic people who are dead. And at one point they do that with someone that they think is dead, but it turns out that she's just been kidnapped. They rescue her after like 20 years, and her actual personality and the AI copy of her personality absolutely hate each other and fight like cats in a sack every time they're in contact. And it's just like all of these, big brain inside out sci-fi.
Yeah, and that's what you want. And again, it's interesting the depths of themes that you can get from this little student movie that could. And I think as film sci-fi gets increasingly marvelized and cinematic universalized, it's really felt like it's really books and novels now where we're starting to see that. The other example, which isn't quite like, speaking of science fiction novels to recommend, obviously Sacha Stronach's The Dawn Hounds, for a good bit of New Zealand sci-fi. And again, that what if massive high concept science fiction, but also people are terrible and like the system of the state continues to grind us down.
So the last thing I like to do is give you an opportunity to plug your shit. Do you have things that you want the internet to know about?
Oh yeah. So actually, in my day job, I am a counselor and trauma therapist.
A thing that the characters in this movie could have used in space.
Oh yeah, like I say, there were layers. You can catch me on Twitter at Ross These Days. I talk a lot about gender equity. I try to drop in a little bit of mental health support and things in there as well. And you can, my website is ross-palethorpe.pagexl.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Russ.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show was produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. If you enjoyed this show, why not go ahead and share it with a friend? You can find the last 10 episodes at npr.nz/show/reserved or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you want an episode older than that, try searching for Reserved Recommendations on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Objective Realty, or you can follow the show on Facebook. And finally, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit community access station. If you like this or any other piece of their fine audio programming, why not fling them $1 or $2? You can go to npr.nz/donate for more information on how to do that.